Children are experts at living in the gaps. We exist in the spaces adults ignore under the dinner table. Behind the heavy velvet curtains, in the crawl space where the air smells like mothballs and damp earth, we see everything, but we understand almost nothing. To a child, a locked door is just a game. A father's late-night weeping is just a strange noise, like the settling of the house. A mother's frantic scrubbing of a spilled drink is just a chore. We catalog these moments like strange pebbles in our pockets, never realizing they are actually unexploded landmines. Tonight, we're going back. Back to the houses that looked perfect from the sidewalk. Back to the summers that felt infinite. Before the weight of the world settled on our shoulders, I've gathered 5 accounts from people who finally opened those locked doors of their memory as adults only to realize that their childhood was a fairy tale. It was a crime scene. Turn down the lights. Lock your door. Let's look at the secrets we weren't supposed to find. Visual lush, 1990s suburban aesthetic, saturated greens, the sound of cicadas. Narrator, in the summer of 1994, my backyard in rural Pennsylvania was my entire universe. My father was a botanist, so he told me. He had this massive industrial-strength greenhouse at the edge of our property, right where the manicured lawn surrendered to the thick, choking woods. The rule was simple: never enter the greenhouse. Dad said the chemicals were toxic to kids, and the rare orchids he grew needed perfect silence to thrive. I'd watch him go in there every evening at sunset, carrying a heavy black cooler. I used to think he was feeding the plants some special magical nectar. I loved my father. He was a soft-spoken man who smelled like cedarwood and peppermint. But I remember the way my mother looked at that greenhouse. She never went near it. She stayed in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she peeled potatoes, her eyes fixed on the tree line. One July night, a massive thunderstorm knocked out our power. The wind was howling, and a branch shattered the glass roof of the greenhouse. I saw my father run out into the rain, frantic, screaming in a way I'd never heard. He didn't look like a botanist. He looked like a man watching his soul burn. 20 years later, after he passed away from a sudden stroke, I had to clear out the property. The greenhouse had been boarded up for a decade. I took a crowbar to the door, expecting to find dead vines and rusted pots. Instead, I found a cellar door hidden under a false floor of potting soil. When I went down there with my flashlight, I didn't find orchids. I found a soundproofed room with a twin mattress and a collection of Polaroids pinned to the wall. They weren't of flowers. They were photos of children from the neighboring town's missing posters I remembered seeing on milk cartons back in the 90s. My gentle father hadn't been protecting delicate plants. He had been a facilitator for people who paid to make children disappear. The black cooler, it wasn't plant food. It was ice for the packages he moved. I didn't grow up in a garden. I grew up on a graveyard of innocence. And my hero was the gravedigger. Visual, the screen fades to a deep, bruised purple. The sound of a heart monitor beeping slowly. Narrator, some secrets are buried in the ground. Others are buried in plain sight, hidden behind the eccentricities we forgive in the people we love. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of the strange, until the story finally breaks. Visual, a grainy handheld camera look. A cluttered American farmhouse in the Midwest. Narrator, my grandma June was a saint. That's what everyone in our small Iowa town said. She took in stray cats, baked pies for the church, and always had a jar of lemon drops waiting for me. But Grandma had a friend who lived in the attic. She called him the silent guest. She told me he was an angel who had lost his wings and needed a place to hide from the men in the black suits. Every morning, she'd have me carry a tray of food, always soft things like oatmeal or mashed potatoes, to the top of the attic stairs. I'd leave the tray, knock 3 times, and run back down. I'd hear the door creak open. I'd hear the scraping of a spoon. I thought I was helping a celestial being. It made me feel special, like I was part of a secret miracle. One day, I got curious. I was 7. I waited by the stairs after I knocked. The door opened, and a hand reached out. It wasn't an angel's hand. It was gray, thin, and the fingernails were long and yellowed. I heard a low, wet wheeze. I was terrified, but Grandma found me and told me that if I ever peeked again, the angel would lose his soul, and it would be my fault. I carried that guilt for years. Grandma died in 2012. While we were cleaning the house for the estate sale, I finally went into that attic. There was no angel. There was a small, cramped space with a bucket for a toilet and hundreds of handwritten notebooks. It turns out, the silent guest was my grandfather, the man the whole town thought had died in a factory fire in 1978. He had died. He had committed a horrific hit-and-run that killed a local family of 4. To protect his reputation and her own status in the church, Grandma June had faked his death and kept him prisoner or protected in that attic for 34 years. He died in that room 3 days after she did, because there was no one left to bring him oatmeal. I hadn't been feeding an angel. I had been sustaining a killer's life sentence in a cage built by saintly hands. Visual static on an old TV screen. A muffled sound of a child laughing. Narrator, loyalty is a dangerous thing in the hands of a child. We are so eager to please that we become accomplices before we even know what a crime is. We see the world through a lens of wonder, while the adults are busy using us as shields. Visual, a sterile, overly bright 1980s apartment. High contrast lighting. Narrator, my mother was a nurse, or at least, she always wore the scrubs. We moved a lot: Florida, Arizona, Texas. She told me we were on the run from my evil father, a man I never met but learned to fear through her stories. She said he was a powerful man who wanted to take me away and hurt us both. She was so protective. Every night she'd give me my special vitamins, a crushed-up pill and a spoonful of chocolate pudding. It made me feel sleepy and heavy, like I was floating in warm water. I was a sickly child, she said. I had trouble walking, my hair was thin, and I often felt confused. But whenever I felt bad, she was there. She'd rock me and whisper, "Only mommy loves you. Only mommy can keep you safe from the world." I lived in a wheelchair until I was 15. One day, while we were at a gas station in a town I didn't recognize, my mom went inside to pay. She left her purse in the car. I crawled painfully because my legs were so weak to reach for a candy bar she'd hidden. I found her wallet instead. I found 5 different driver's licenses with 5 different names, and I found a clipping from a newspaper. It was a photo of a man, my father, holding a baby. The headline didn't say he was a monster. It said, "Father pleads for return of daughter kidnapped by mentally ill mother." I wasn't sick. She had been poisoning me with high doses of anti-seizure medication and muscle relaxants for over a decade to keep me dependent on her. Narrator, the most terrifying realizations are the ones that rewrite our own bodies. When you realize your very weakness was a construction, your reality shatters. But some secrets aren't about what was done to us. They're about what was happening right beneath our feet. Visual, an old Victorian-style house. Dark wood, peeling wallpaper. Narrator, we lived in an old Victorian in New England. It was a beautiful, drafty place that always felt like it was breathing. My dad was a restoration expert, always working in the basement, hammering and sawing late into the night. He told me the house was haunted by a friendly ghost named Charlie. Charlie lived in the pipes. Dad said that if I ever heard rhythmic tapping or muffled crying through the vents, it was just Charlie playing a game. He told me to tap back 3 times to tell Charlie to go to sleep. I loved Charlie. I'd sit by the floor vent in my bedroom and whisper my secrets to him. Sometimes, I'd hear a faint high-pitched whistle come back, or a scratching sound. It was my secret childhood friend. One winter, my dad disappeared. The police came, and they spent days in the basement. I remember sitting on the porch, watching them carry out heavy, industrial-sized barrels. I asked one of the officers if they found Charlie. He looked at me with a face that I still see in my nightmares, a mixture of pity and pure horror. Years later, I read the court transcripts. My father wasn't restoring the house. He was a professional cleaner for the mob. The basement had been outfitted with a chemical vat system. Charlie wasn't a ghost. The tapping I heard, the muffled crying, those were people. People who were still alive when they were put into the pipes and the vats. My father had taught me to tap back, to tell them to go to sleep, because it signaled to him that they were making too much noise and he needed to finish the job. I wasn't playing with a ghost. I was participating in the final moments of dozens of victims. I was the last thing they heard, the sound of a child's knuckles on metal, telling them that no one was coming to save them. Polaroid's visual, a series of blurred, fast-moving images of childhood toys, swing sets, and then a slow fade to a single, empty chair in a dark room. Narrator, this final story is my own. I grew up in a house filled with photography. My mother was a hobbyist, and our hallways were lined with black and white portraits of me. I was always smiling, always dressed in Sunday best. But there was one photo she kept on her nightstand. It was a man in a military uniform. She told me he was my father, a hero who died in a classified mission before I was born. I grew up saluting that photo. I wrote letters to a dead man, telling him I was proud of him. When I turned 21, I applied for a government job that required a high-level security clearance. They did a background check on my family. The investigator sat me down in a small, windowless room. He asked me about the man in the photo. I told him the hero's story. He slid a file across the table. The man in the photo wasn't my father. He wasn't even a soldier. He was a convicted serial predator who had died in prison 3 years before I was even conceived. My mother had found his photo in a discarded newspaper and invented a father for me because the truth was too ugly. I was the product of a weekend she spent at a spiritual retreat that was actually a fringe cult. She had escaped, but she was so broken by the experience that she chose a monster to be my hero rather than tell me I was born from a nightmare. She had spent my whole life making me love a ghost who, in reality, would have hunted me. We think we know who we are. We think our memories are the foundation of our souls. But for many of us, that foundation is built on a lie. We are the survivors of secrets we were never supposed to find out. Visual, the camera slowly pans out from the empty chair, revealing a dark, infinite void. Narrator, the past is never really gone. It's just waiting for us to grow up enough to understand the horrors we witnessed as children. Perhaps there's a door in your own memory you've been afraid to open. Perhaps there is a reason your parents gave you for a strange event that doesn't quite add up anymore. Sometimes, it's better to leave the door locked. But once you know, you can never go back to being that innocent child in the gaps. If these stories stayed with you, leave a comment below. What was the secret you discovered about your own family? Let's talk about the things we weren't supposed to know. Don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the dark corners of the human experience.